Hey guys, Dodge Landisman here. Just wanted to give you a rundown today as to what happened to me and my involvement with the Danny Masterson trial. Now, for many of you that have been following me, probably for at least half of you, you've already seen this story, you've already heard about it, so I would just say skip this video, don't watch it. But I've also had a number of new subscribers, as well as a heightened amount of interest in the wake of the Danny Masterson sentencing. So I figured I'd describe to you how the Church of Scientology tried to protect Danny Masterson and protect any negative press that would come out in result of the charges that Danny Masterson was facing, particularly when they interfered with me as I was a news anchor who talked about and brought up the Danny Masterson case, specifically in relation with Lisa Marie Presley. Lisa Marie Presley, daughter of Elvis, as I'm sure you know, before she passed, she was getting ready to speak out against the Church of Scientology. The other thing that she was getting ready to do was testify in favor of her friend, who was one of the Jane Doe victims who had been sexually assaulted, or obviously worse, by Danny Masterson. Lisa Marie Presley was asked by the Church of Scientology 20 years ago, when she was a committed member, to call one of the Jane Doe victims and tell her not to press charges because she was actually close with that person. 20 years later, she felt a lot of regret, was getting ready to get out of the church completely, and she had agreed to testify in the original trial of Danny Masterson. That trial ended up in a hung jury, so he was retried. She was most likely prepared and willing to testify in the retrial. And I wanted to add that to Lisa Marie Presley's legacy. And in the coverage of her death by the mainstream media, I was a local news reporter and a local news anchor. The coverage of her death essentially talked about her legacy and her impressive music, but didn't talk about that she was quite heroic to go against the church despite all the private and public repercussions that she would most certainly face. In spite of all of that, she was still willing to get justice for her friend. And I thought that was an incredibly important part of her story. Now, of course, if you're the Church of Scientology, you don't want the public knowing anything more about Danny Masterson or his potential victims or his egregious acts. So, because Lisa Marie Presley was getting all this attention in the wake of her death, this little news clip that I put online from my local television show, they could not have that floating around in the ether, because I was actually one of the first mainstream news reporters to talk about this connection. And I was an anchor for an NBC and Fox and ABC affiliate in Yuma, Arizona. So very small time, very, very local. Yuma, Arizona has a population of 100,000 people. But I released this video talking about Lisa Marie Presley's legacy and her readiness to testify against Masterson in favor of these victims. And I just said this was a part of the story that had fallen through the cracks. So even though I was this small-time local news anchor, I put the video up on YouTube. Within a day, it got 6,000 views. And I also put up a print edition online. So a day later, I got a call from someone named Corinne Powell, and I didn't know who she was at first. I later found out that she is the chief spokesperson for Scientology. So probably third most prestigious member, third highest up within the Church of Scientology. Pretty serious. So she called me, and she felt like I didn't know anything about Scientology, and essentially asked me to stand down. She said, I talked about fair gaming and how Lisa Marie Presley could be a victim of fair gaming. She said, all this fair gaming, I don't know what you're talking about. You seem to be going after religion. I don't know where you got your sources. All of this seems ill-informed and inaccurate. And I played dumb. I said, I didn't know that, or I didn't know that the church was innocent of all of this. And I pretended not to know about the crimes of Scientology. And I said I would look into taking it down, and did essentially tell her that I would take it down. I did not. I figured that it was a minor situation. This was a local news station and not from a city that was large or prestigious or anything like that. So I didn't think she'd actually follow up. But boy, did she ever. She called, I ignored it. She called again, I ignored it. Then she called the main TV news station and essentially threatened to fire me. And I'll kind of give a little play-by-play as to what happened after this. The bosses summoned me in. There were two people that essentially were the bosses of the station. One was the news director, who was involved in the day-to-day, and the other was the general manager, who kind of owned the whole station. And my station, KYMA, was under the aegis of a bigger parent company called the News Press Gazette. And the News Press Gazette has about 8 or 9 different local TV stations around. So I had a meeting with the news director and the general manager. And first they said how sloppy and inaccurate my article was, and how I was attacking religion. Their exact words were, well, it looks like you're attacking this religion. And I said to them, well, do you know about the crimes of Scientology? And then my news director immediately retorted back, well, Scientology hasn't been relevant since South Park. He figured people stopped paying attention to Scientology after that South Park episode over 10 years ago now at this point, which is obviously not the case. And he felt like I was victimizing this religion. So initially, I back up all of the claims that she's preparing to testify. This is from Deputy District Attorney Mueller. These are documents from Judge Olmedo. I would say pretty reliable sources. And I was able to back up all of the claims that I made. That Scientology has a history of fair gaming people. That's what the church attacked me for saying, that they said wasn't true. That Scientology, when they have sessions with people, they try to get them to admit to as many wrongdoings as possible, even if the wrongdoings are not accurate, so they can hold their misdeeds over their head so they can get what they want out of them. So much of this is essentially common knowledge. And they said, well, you didn't source anything. You didn't say, according to the New York Times or according to Variety or anything like that. And therefore, it's not valid. But if you even lightly Google Scientology, all of this stuff comes up. So I would argue that it was pretty common knowledge. They were ultimately satisfied that my information was correct, that even though it wasn't specifically sourced, I didn't say according to this, according to that. But remember, as a news anchor, each story you could only read for about 1 minute. You have about a 1-minute timeline. So I had to condense everything and essentially have an audience understand what was happening who didn't have that much of a knowledge about Scientology in the first place. So that was my argument. They felt like, okay, they looked at all the sources. They felt like at least the sources were legitimate. And they said themselves they were going to fight for me, but they didn't know if the bigger parent company would want to fire me or not. But at least they felt like I made a massive mistake, that I was being this irresponsible reporter, that I'd be on thin ice, that I had my 2 strikes, and this would count as 2, and then the third I'd be totally out. But they at least felt like I was being truthful. Now, as I look back on all of this, I think my article was just correct from the very beginning, and was filled and had integrity journalistically even from the beginning, because a lot of this stuff, again, is quite frankly common knowledge. So I thought that was interesting. So I met with them. They said they'd fight with me, and they put me in limbo for about 3 days. I was a news anchor and would do the morning shows. And they demoted me temporarily, unless I got fired, but they demoted me temporarily to being a reporter. So they changed my schedule, and there was 3 days where they said they didn't know if they were going to fire me or not. And that's the most awkward situation, where you really kind of hear your ears ringing, and you see spots in your eyes, and your heart is beating that entire 3 days. And it's really one of the most bizarre and awkward kind of 3 days of my life, where it would have been nice if they just put me out of my misery and shot me quickly and said, hey, you're fired. But they gave me those 3 days in limbo. So finally, they tell me what the final result of this situation is. And of course, I was fired. And they said that the Church of Scientology directly threatened to sue. Now, I offered many times simply to take the story down and to take the YouTube video down. And that's why Scientology was mad, because there was no one with a suit and tie talking about Danny Masterson and the Lisa Marie Presley connection who was standing in front of an NBC logo. Essentially, even though this was very small time, I was a very small time insignificant anchor, this gave that story credibility and some authority simply because of the visuals, because of the NBC logo, because of me looking like a news anchor, etc. And it was the first time when the Lisa Marie Presley, Danny Masterson connection at least in video on the mainstream news, had been mentioned. Yes, the Los Angeles Times mentioned something and some others, but in terms of video news, this was something new. So I think they were very fearful that somebody who is potentially could be part of the jury, where this issue didn't get a lot of attention, they could see this and figure that Masterson was guilty or have some admiration for the actions of Lisa Marie Presley, and therefore it would be harder to let Danny Masterson off scot-free in his retrial. Now, that would be an obstruction of justice issue, as well as tampering with the freedom of press. So I think I'll very well be part of that lawsuit, because there is an obstruction of justice lawsuit being brought on by Scientology in direct relation with the Danny Masterson case. So I'll certainly have a role for that. But it was interesting because I was meeting with the news anchor, meeting with the news director and the general manager, and they kept changing their goalposts and their arguments as to why I was fired. And I said to them, well, I proved everything was true. And they said, well, you're not supposed to get sources from anything other than Associated Press and CNN. And as a news anchor, what you do is you have to fill your show. You have to fill your show. So you're not a reporter. You don't go out and get stories. And essentially, CNN will give you a feeder as well as your local affiliate. So if I was doing the 6 a.m. Fox show, I'd get the news of the day, the story, the 1 minute, 30-second story of the day from Fox News. If I was NBC, I'd get it from Bree Jackson, who was the NBC reporter. And then CNN, oddly enough, was kind of the granddaddy of all local news. You could be Fox, you could be NBC, but you'd still get your source material from CNN. And what CNN would do is they'd give a script for the anchor to exactly follow. So there's no room for creativity, no room for, let's say you're a news anchor and you felt the mainstream media didn't get something correct or was missing an important ingredient in their coverage. Well, guess what? You have to stick to the script. And that's what my boss has told me. Now, there's no legal or even written hard and fast rule about that. I was within my right to add extra to the CNN script. So I saw this very basic framework of a CNN script saying Lisa Marie Presley passed away. And I used their B-roll and just simply added about 9 sentences in terms of her relation with Lisa Marie Presley's relation with the Danny Masterson case, and bringing up Danny Masterson for the first time when the other mainstream media had not done so. There's nothing illegal about it, and you'd think, like, if a local news station wants a good reporter, that good reporter would care about the stories he's talking about and would do extra research to try to give his audience the most truthful story that is possible. You think that a local TV news station would appreciate that. Oh, this news anchor is going above and beyond because the mainstream media was missing the truth in their coverage. And if you watch this specific anchor, you're going to get the truth because this anchor, me in this example, actually does the research and wants to bring the entire picture to the audience, not just the copied and pasted sentences that CNN gives me. So they said that the fact that I didn't use CNN, because this wasn't talked about on CNN, or the Associated Press as sources, therefore it was a violation of journalistic duty and my journalistic integrity. Then that seems like a sad state of affairs for the mainstream media. If you're a local TV news reporter, or or an anchor, or if you're a national TV news anchor, all of a sudden, it's not viable, it's not moral, it's not acceptable, or you'll get fired to add your own information, even when that strengthens the entire truth of the story. So, I knew the mainstream media didn't look into themselves or self-analyze that much or didn't care and was very sloppy and flippant about just reproducing the news that CNN gives them or that Fox gives them or that NBC gives them. But I didn't know that I could be fired over adding my own additional bit of information. So I thought that was fascinating. Both my general manager and news director wanted me to stay. But again, the entire time, they still felt like I was in the wrong, that I made this violation. So I got fired, and for about 3 days, I didn't know what to do. I felt like I was the biggest loser in the world. And I remember even my dad was furious that I totally fucked up, pardon my French, totally messed up a good gig. how could I do this? My career is completely over, and I should get a very basic, easy to do job. Absolutely furious. He knew nothing about Scientology, so he even told me that I was. So I don't blame him, but he even told me that why should I just bully this religion? Not really a religion. It's more of a cult than a religion, and people who follow Scientology know this. Now, after I got some local press, and my dad saw that thousands of people, thank you guys for commenting on the video initially 6 months ago, because that certainly helped sway his opinion. And then he kind of saw that I was in the right. But for that weekend, boy, I felt like the biggest idiot in the world. And then I flushed my entire media career down the toilet. I'd lose any semblance of audience that I'd ever have. And I'd never have a career job again. That would have been it. So I had to really sit and think about it. And I thought, well, I got fired. I could pretend it never happened and go to another local TV news station. I didn't even really like being a local TV news anchor, because I hated the lack of originality and the inability for you to stray from the script and really add your own voice, especially if you felt like you had some crucial information to add. And I felt like if there wasn't room for me to be that creative person and actually assist the watching audience and giving them the truth, then that work wasn't enjoyable. So I thought I could do that, but I'd hate to do it anyway. And so finally I went to the press, first to Tony Ortega. And he published something fairly quickly. It was pretty much on my side. He said I got a few things wrong, which I went over some of the stuff with Aaron. It wasn't that inaccurate, but you could look at that video. But I appreciate Tony for broadcasting this. And then Scientology continued to fair game me. They already fair gamed me for getting me fired from my job. Then they had their Twitter page. There's a Twitter page called The Stand League, which claims to be an arbitrator, a supporter of religious freedom, and simply a Twitter page for religious freedom. In reality, what it is it's a Twitter page run by the Church of Scientology to go after each and every person who is, in their minds, attacking Scientology. So they went after me, and they said, first they commented on Tony Ortega posting this story and said that I got duped and that Tony Ortega was duping me and that he's rubbing in my face and I probably just wanted to kind of run and hide. Then I commented on Tony's Twitter saying, thank you for getting this out. Great article. Really appreciate it. And then the Stands League, the Twitter page run by Scientology, posts this picture of me in kind of grainy, in a grainy lens, kind of like a political attack ad of me in a suit anchoring, with a caption, "Listen to Tony Ortega, lose your job." So they tried to attack me a little bit. Although, compared to the other fair game tactics that other people have received, especially these victims, which is what the obstruction of justice case will be about, I got off pretty lightly, I think, to be quite frank. But so Tony was a catalyst, and then a New York Post, through the Stands League attacking me, noticed me and liked it, and then a reporter from the New York Post, and then I contacted her, and then the press kind of spiraled and snowballed from there. So it's interesting. Scientology always has this ability to shoot themselves in the foot and make things a million times worse. I might not have gotten any mainstream press. Instead, I got this article in the New York Post detailing my firing. I probably wouldn't have gotten any of that had they not attacked this reporter and had this New York Post reporter not seen them attacking me. So it's just one prime example out of many as to how they always make things worse and worse and worse for themselves. And so, yeah, it was a kind of fun to go on the media blitz and became friends with Aaron Smith-Levin. Of course, many of you who subscribe to me came to my channel from his channel. And I was covering the case early on, and really for the first time in my journalistic life, I felt pride because Aaron said he was appreciative that the Jane Does were appreciative that I was there to cover. I covered only 2 of the opening days of the trial, and then I got a new job. But at least for the very beginning, for the very opening shotgun of everything, I was there and was able to relay some key information to help Aaron's channel and to help anybody be informed who was interested in this story. So really enjoyed that. Then I got a job for Valuetainment, which is run by a gentleman named Patrick Bet-David, and they have 4 million subscribers, so they're pretty well known. And the way I got that job is I was trying to make this media blitz. George Takei mentioned me, Perez Hilton, some other publications. So I was just kind of going, trying to connect with CE who would have me on their podcast or whatever, or their YouTube. And so I contacted the Patrick Bet-David Twitter page. I said I'd love to be on because Patrick had on Mike Rinder, and even before that, Mark Headley, who was also one of the people that's really speaking out against the religion, who used to be part of it. And they thought that was way too ambitious, not going to happen, but someone from HR, in response in their message, said, hey, why don't you actually come and work for us? And I thought that was interesting. I liked what they're about, and I had this conversation with them, and I said I wanted to continue covering the Danny Masterson case, and they said, cool, that's no problem. And they thought the fact that I got fired from a mainstream media source for speaking the truth was kind of this badass badge of honor. That I was the type of person they were looking for. Somebody with some guts, somebody with some tangible experience to communicate effectively on camera, but somebody who was always focused on the truth and was not buying into the mainstream media narrative. I grew up in the mainstream media world. I'd been a news anchor at different stations for about 4 years, but not once did I trust them or listen to them or believe them or respect them or want to parrot what they said. So it's a very awkward career for me to be in, certainly. So I got that job, and it was interesting. It was a bit of a letdown because I was just a writer, and they thought I'd do some more video stuff. And early on, I had this really fun report in East Palestine, but I think that the politics we were just too different on, and I'm certainly not a hardcore partisan, especially being on news. I some people don't know my politics. I voted for Joe Jorgensen, the Libertarian candidate, in 2020, and voted for Gary Johnson, the Libertarian, in 2016, and Gary Johnson, the Libertarian, in 2012. So I have a dislike, really, of both parties. That's my politics. I had to keep it secret for a while. But I'm not hardcore partisan. So I thought, while Alex Jones might have some interesting points about mainstream media control, the fact that they were reflexively supportive of him and did not push back on any of his Sandy Hook issues of him accusing the parents of the slain children in the Sandy Hook, Connecticut shooting of being crisis actors. That's not something that I'm comfortable staying with long term. And there might be some conservative people that feel like it was a hoax. And hey, all the respect in the world, more power to you. If you want to comment and explain to me why Sandy Hook is a hoax, my comment section is open and we could debate. But at least with my personal viewpoint, a 3-hour interview where they don't push back, I just kind of felt like long term that was going to be tough to work full time with. I still have a good relationship with them. Another thing I did at Valuetainment was I was part of this YouTube page called Valuetainment Comedy, where I'd make fun of the news, kind of like Weekend Update. Is very inappropriate and kind of gross. And so if you want to see my frat boy humor side, you can check that out. And we'll still be doing that, flying in once a month, because I really did have a good time doing that. And I'll be doing some freelance work for them. And none of this is a secret. They know I disagree with them politically. But, Patrick himself, very, very nice guy. Really considerate. And I remember there's a cultish vibe with him. Not a bad cultish vibe, but a cultish vibe. And I remember what inspired me to walk is we were all hanging out at the office, and he was he was saying, listen, if you guys are here from the beginning, like, you are the OGs. Like, you'll be remembered. You're the OGs. But listen, if you're not 100% invested with us, if you're not 100% invested in our politics, if you're not with us all the way, like, hey, we wish you well. We'll get you to somewhere else where you want to go. No hard feelings, but this is not the place for you. He wasn't directly talking to me. He didn't even know I had any issues. But boy, did I feel that in my heart. And that's what happened. I took Patrick at his word, and Patrick was a man of his word, of him saying, we'll help you to get you to where you want to go. Like, I'm still working with them freelance, and we'll do some stuff in New Hampshire. So we continue to have a good relationship, and I have a very good relationship with them, even very much to this day. But the other issue was with them is, again, they would not let me cover Scientology. And they said, we don't want it. Their exact words were, when I asked about flying to LA on my own dime, I said, hey, listen, you don't have to pay me. I'll do this on my own dime, pay for my own hotel, pay for my own flight. I'll do it, I'll take a day off from work, and it could be an unpaid day even, if you want that. But they said they did not want to fire me for discussing an issue that got me fired before. So essentially warning me that if I touched this while I was with them, that I would be fired. Because needless to say, the Church of Scientology, even if I posted something on my own personal YouTube page, just by association, if it got any traction, they would come back to Valuetainment and they would threaten to sue, and Valuetainment would have to fire me. Now I'm free because I am no longer associated with them full time. But that's one of the reasons I walked. I was sick for the... Speaking of which, I had bronchitis, so I was sick for the sentencing specifically. But I was able to show up to LA on the 4th of August as well as the 23rd and provide some really crucial information to Aaron, because Aaron was there at the actual sentencing, so I felt like there's also less of a need to fly there. But when nobody else was there at the final closing days, I was able to help. And what I heard at the sentencing, I think, again, was the proudest moment my journalistic career, because I heard that the Jane Does appreciated that I was fighting for them and covering this, and I actually met one of them. I'm not going to go into specifics, but I could say this because two of the identities are revealed. One of the Jane Does, I didn't recognize her. I was sitting down. Someone quietly sat down next to me, and me being polite, I smiled, and she smiled back and looked ahead and figured she was just being polite. And then she said, "Hi, you're Dutch, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And then she described herself, I'm not going to give specific names, as one of the Jane Doe, one of the Jane Does that was involved in the Danny Masterson case. And she said she wanted to thank me for that early coverage and drumming up that early media coverage, and wanted to also thank me for my courage in covering the Danny Masterson case when I was a member of the mainstream local news and actually trying to get that truth out there and how meaningful that was. And boy, like, working in mainstream media, your work is so insignificant and meaningless. I've never heard anything like that. So that made me, I get a little teary. That made me want to keep going. More than anybody I've met, more than any other instance I've had. It's just for someone to say that you're helping them get justice is like it validates all of your work. And so that was the coolest moment. I'll just close by saying, everybody watching, all of your comments, some of you donated as well, which, hey, if you still want to donate to GoFundMe, there's going to be a trial probably in Canada. There's a child trafficking trial, labor trafficking trial, as well as a potential sex abuse cover-up. So in addition to the obstruction of justice. So now I'm kind of continuing to raise money for my GoFundMe if you want to donate to that. The link is in the page, but no pressure. I made a bigger push earlier on. But but I appreciate all of your comments because, again, after like what my dad said to me and how much I messed up and how I blew it like I always do, yada, yada, yada. Like, I didn't think I was going to be in journalism anymore. And then I took a risk and did this video with Aaron and must have gotten 200 comments saying that I was in the right. And it gave me that fortitude to keep going. And it gave me that peace and knowledge that I actually was a decent reporter and a decent anchor, and that I was actually doing my best to try to expose the truth and deliver it to the audience. And that I did something meaningful and something in the right, actually. Contrary to what I initially thought and contrary to what my parents thought. I needed to hear that. Otherwise, I would have quit from media entirely. So thank you. As to what's next, obstruction of justice case happening in terms of Scientology's involvement with the Danny Masterson trial. Now, of course, most of this will be centered around the pressuring of the Jane Does, centering about trying to control a lot of some funny business within the jury. But obstruction of justice, if you're trying to control the media narrative, that is obstruction of justice, because that is impeding freedom of the press, especially because there was actually nothing inaccurate about the article. So I may very, very well play a role in this, because remember, they didn't want somebody authoritative in a suit and tie talking about Danny Masterson, because back then it hadn't gotten any coverage. Post-conviction and post-sentencing, the issue, it has spiraled out of control. But before that, when he was just on trial for the second time, Variety had covered it. Rolling Stone had covered it, which I use as my sources. Law and Crime, which is pretty good with YouTube now, had covered it. But the CNN really hadn't, besides her cursory one-sentence thing. And the mainstream media had it. And Scientology felt like they could keep the lid on the entire time. They obviously couldn't. But this might be a part of it. They didn't want the jury to see anything negative about Danny Masterson. They didn't want the jury to see a connection between Lisa Marie Presley, Scientology, and Danny Masterson, because if anybody who saw that and later served on the jury, even though they're entitled, before they're selected on the jury, this wasn't during jury process, they're entitled to consume any media they want beforehand. They were trying to make sure any potential juror, at least if they didn't have an interest in Scientology, wouldn't Google this and find this new bit of information. But it's, again, factual information. So that could have helped the juror actually get to the truth of the matter and create a correct verdict. So yeah, expect to hear more from me, I would say, in that regard. But yeah, just wanted to give a rundown as to what happened. We'll be going to New Hampshire soon to cover the primaries. Before that, East Palestine, to cover an interesting mayoral election. Made a lot of friends when I covered that when I covered that incident with the chemical train derailment and the train spill. So we're going to do follow-up, because again, it's like the mainstream news completely forgot about it, and it's as if nobody cares. But I care about those people, and those are friends that I made. So I'll be following that, and then going out to New Hampshire, and then hopefully all the Scientology stuff, in addition to the obstruction of justice, potential case in Canada, which I would certainly camp out in Toronto. The dog loves Toronto and the cool weather. I think he's been to Toronto twice, my dog, and I've been to Toronto about 5 times. And then, of course, as I mentioned, child labor trafficking, sex abuse cover-up. And in the near future, we're going to have Jeff Augustine, who's an investigator, as well as Graham Barry, who has taken Scientology to court many times. So he'll be able to give us all a good rundown and where I might expect to be. So that'll be fun. So keep watching. Again, if you want to support GoFundMe, that is in the link, because I still want to continue covering these trials. There's going to be a lot on the agenda. But wanted to thank you all for your support. And if you're new, just wanted to give you this rundown as to what happened and the efforts that Scientology tried to do to really cover up the freedom of the press. And so I play a very, very, very small role in this Danny Masterson thing, but enough of a role where I felt like it was relevant to get my story out. So thank you guys for watching. Appreciate it. Take care.